This is Bluebook Digital SAT 7, Reading and Writing Module 2. At the turn of the 20th century, black residents of Richmond, Virginia had few formal options for banking and other financial services. To blank the situation, MLW chartered the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank in 1903. The bank went on to provide home loans and savings opportunities to thousands of black families over the following decades. To blank the situation, to prolong, to rectify, to retain, or to highlight. Well, it's to fix the situation, to mitigate the situation, to make it better, to improve it, which is rectify. The creation of L.R.'s 1926 animated film The Adventures of Prince Ahmed was a blank process. Over the course of 3 years, R and her collaborators painstakingly made more than 250,000 individual images of hand-cut paper silhouettes and repeatedly had to invent entirely new methods and tools to create the special effects R envisioned. Well, I paused where it said painstakingly, so it must be that was a haphazard, a contentious, an ineffectual, or an arduous. It's an arduous, as in requiring a great amount of labor and effort. Diadromous fish migrate between freshwater and marine biomes during their life cycle. The migration's obligate nature is why diadromous fish can be blank those that are merely euryhaline, able to tolerate high salinity. The euryhaline black-chin tilapia can survive high salinity, but its life cycle does not involve relocation to a different biome, as does that of the diadromous wild salmon. Wow, these are advanced words too. Can be demarcated from, reconstituted as, conflated with, or derived from. Well, notice that the colon goes on to explain it. So it says, the black-chin tilapia can survive high salinity, but it doesn't do the thing where it goes to a different biome. So there is a fish that can also do the high salinity, but it doesn't go back and forth between freshwater and marine. So I think what they're saying is why they can be differentiated from, which is demarcated from. It's not conflated with, as in confused with, definitely not derived from. Reconstituted as, just that doesn't apply there at all. That's like they reappear in a new form as. No. One popular theory of the origin of the moon, the Big Whack, posits that a protoplanet called Theia collided with Earth, flinging debris into orbit and eventually coalesced into the moon. Until recently, Theia was blank, but researcher QY and colleagues now claim to have identified pieces of the protoplanet in the lowermost section of Earth's mantle. Until recently, it was desultory, spurious, veritable, notional. Wow. Definitely not veritable as in true. Desultory, I think, means happening suddenly. I don't think that really relates here. I think what they're trying to say was it was only an idea, but now they've discovered actual evidence that proves it. So spurious or notional? Well, spurious has to do with being false or misleading. So I don't think it's that one. I think notional worked better. It was only a hypothesis. It was only a theory. It was only an idea. But then it became more than just a notion when they identified actual evidence that proves it. Speakers on a path in an outdoor setting. A slight wind shakes the seed pods. My thoughts are spent as the black seeds. My thoughts tear me, I dread their fever, I am scattered in its whirl, I am scattered like the hot shriveled seeds. Best describes the function of the underlined portion in the text as a whole. Well, without looking at the answer choices, I would have said, a slight wind shakes the seed pods. I think it's trying to draw a parallel between the wind rustling plants outside and the person's own lack of mental clarity because they feel that their head is full of thoughts and they can't focus and they're sort of scattered emotionally. It illustrates a change in the natural environment that the speaker implies is responsible for the growing misgivings described in the text. I'm not sure about that. It establishes an example of consistency in the natural landscape that the speaker then contrasts with the unpredictability of human emotions. No. It presents an observation of an occurrence in the natural world that the speaker then expands on to convey a sense of a turbulent interior state. I think it's that one. It evokes the ordinariness of an event in nature to suggest that the critical self-evaluation the speaker engages in is a common... No. So it's C. Why is C as in cat better than A as in apple? Illustrates a change in the natural environment, is responsible for... It's more like what's going on in your head is analogous to what's happening in nature. My thoughts are spent as the black seed. So like what's happening in my mind is as chaotic and jumbled as the wind rustling a plant on the side of the road or whatever. So I think C is a better answer. In a turbulent inner state is scattered in your mind. The Bayeux Tapestry from 11th century France depicts 75 scenes over 250 feet of fabric. It was likely produced by workers embroidering in sections and then joining the resulting panels together. It's plausible that the workshop that produced the tapestry had never produced one so large, and some researchers claim that a close examination of the joins, the places where the panels are stitched together, suggests that the workers developed and refined their joining process over the course of production. For example, the first join the workers completed exhibits a clear misalignment of the borders of the two panels, whereas the later joins are virtually invisible. Which choice best describes the function of the underlined sentence in the text as a whole? Well, I would have said that this sort of confirms the suggestion that they didn't quite know what they were doing at first, but then they figured it out as they went. It identifies the people and events depicted in the... No. It supports an argument about the workers who produced the Bayeux Tapestry. Maybe. It compares the Bayeux Tapestry with other tapestry. No. It describes how researchers determined where the Bayeux Tapestry was produced. No. It supports the argument. So the fact that the first connection point was off, but the later connection points were correct, supports the argument that they never made one so big, but as they went on, they got better at it on the spot. Thomas Mann's 1924 novel, The Magic Mountain, translated by... Okay. The story of H.C. that we intend to tell here, not for his sake, for the reader will come to know him as a perfectly ordinary if engaging young man, but for the sake of the story itself, which seems to us to be very much worth telling, although in H.C.'s favor it should be noted that it is his story, and that not every story happens to everybody, is a story that took place long ago and is, so to speak, covered with the patina of history and must necessarily be told with verbs whose tense is that of the deepest past. What does the text most strongly suggest about the story of H.C.? Wow. Well, I'm going to jump over everything between the dashes as a way to get started with this. So imagine crossing that out. The story of H.C. that we intend to tell here is a story that took place long ago and is, so to speak, covered with a patina of history and must necessarily be told with verbs whose tense is that of the deepest past. Is just what remains going to help you identify the answer choice? I'm not sure. Though it is true that stories of even the most uninteresting people are themselves interesting because all people are unique, the reason the story is interesting is nonetheless difficult to understand because the passage of... What? No, it's not that, because it doesn't say that even the most uninteresting people are interesting because all people are... No, I thought it was more like this person at first seems not that special, but the story does actually have some special attributes for some reason. But let's keep going. Even though it is a story of a person of no particular importance, its age and the manner in which it therefore must be told are both indicators that the story itself is important. But is the age itself the reason that it's important? I don't think so, but let's leave that. Like all stories about the lives of inconsequential people, the story must necessarily be related in a particular way if the reason the story is consequential is to be made evident to the audience. I don't think so, and I also hesitate to answer one that says, like all stories, because it doesn't mention that it's like all other stories of its type, so I don't think it's that. It is a remarkable story that happened to an unremarkable person, though one could plausibly argue that because the story is valuable, some of its value accrues to the person at its center. I think the accrues to the person at its center is what's in this parens here. I think. That's a really tough question. Although in H.C.'s favor, it should be noted that it is his story and that not every story happens to everybody. The story of H.C. that we intend to tell here seems to us very much worth the telling. Yeah. I think it's D as in dog. That's a really, really hard question, though. Early Earth is thought to have been characterized by a stagnant lid tectonic regime in which the upper lithosphere, the outer rocky layer, was essentially immobile and there was no interaction between the lithosphere and the underlying mantle. Researchers investigated the timing of the transition from the stagnant lid regime to a tectonic plate regime in which the lithosphere is fractured into dynamic plates that in turn allow lithospheric and mantle material to mix. Examining chemical data from lithospheric and mantle-derived rocks ranging from 285 to 3.8 billion years old, the researchers dated the transition to 3.2 billion years ago. Which finding, if true, would most directly support the researchers' conclusion? The conclusion is that the transition happened 3.2 billion years ago. So whatever the answer is, it has to be that it's before and after 3.2 billion years, something critical changed. Now, let's go back and simplify. So, if early Earth had a stagnant lid tectonic regime, it was immobile, there was no interaction between lithosphere and the underlying mantle. So, from the beginning of Earth until 3.2 billion years ago, nothing mixed together between the lithosphere and mantle. And then, starting 3.2 billion years ago, it did start mixing together. Okay. Among rocks known to be older than 3.2 billion years, significantly more are mantle-derived than lithospheric, but the opposite is true for the rocks younger than... I don't think so, but I'm going to leave that. Mantle-derived rocks older than 3.2 billion years show significantly more compositional diversity than lithospheric rocks older than... I don't think so. It's got to somehow compare what happened. I don't think it's that. There is a positive correlation between the age of lithospheric rocks and their chemical similarity to mantle-derived rocks, and that correlation increases significantly in strength at around 3.2 billion years old. So that would be saying the older the rock is, the more it's the same for the lithospheric and the mantle. I think that's backwards though, right? Because if they were separate, if they were completely not mixing until 3.2 billion years ago, then there would be a negative correlation, or the positive correlation would be that they are more and more different as you go further back in time because they didn't mix. Mantle-derived rocks younger than 3.2 billion years contain some material that is not found in older mantle-derived rocks, but is found in older and contemporaneous lithospheric rocks. I think so. Let me see if I can explain that in the real world. So, the newer mantle ones have stuff that shows they've mixed together with lithospheric. So the newer mantle ones have stuff that's not in the old mantle ones, and they also the new mantle ones have stuff that's in old and new lithospheric. So that's basically saying the newer mantle ones show that they've mixed with the lithospheric, whereas the old mantle ones did not. Yeah. Almost all works of fiction contain references to the progression of time, including the time of day when events in the story take place. In a 2020 study, A, C, and S claim that an observable pattern in such references reflects a shift in human behavior prompted by the spread of electric lighting in the late 19th century. The researchers drew this conclusion from an analysis of more than 50,000 novels spanning many centuries and cultures, using software to recognize and tally both specific references, that is, clock phrases, such as 7 a.m. or 2:30 p.m., and implied ones, such as mentions of meals typically associated with a particular time of day. Which finding from the study of true would most directly support the researchers' conclusion? Well, the conclusion is that happened because of a shift in human behavior prompted by the spread of electric lighting in the late 19th century. The late 19th century. So in 1870 or 1890, people started using electricity and therefore using clocks or making reference to clock time much more in books. Okay? Novels published after the year 1800 include the clock phrase 10 a.m. less often than novels published before the year 1800 do. Well, that's wrong for multiple reasons. That's the wrong way around, and it's not the late 19th century. That's the first year of the 19th century, so no. Novels published after 1880 contain significantly more references to activities occurring after 10 p.m. than do novels from earlier periods. Not quite sure about that. Among novels published in the 19th century, implied time references become steadily more common than clock phrases as No, it's not that the implied becomes more common than the... No. The time references of 12 and midnight are used with roughly the same... Well, it's definitely not that. Let me go back to C for a second. Published in 19th implied references become steadily more common than clock phrases as publication dates approach 1900. No, because... it's both the time references and the implied ones become more common after the late 19th century. So it's not that. It seems like it has to be B. Novels published after 1880 contain significantly more references to activities occurring after 10 p.m. I guess the after 10 p.m. is literally the words after 10 p.m. or it says 11 p.m. or 11:30 p.m. or midnight. Yeah, which makes sense. Okay. Percentage of ULE attributed to population growth and GDP per capita growth in 2 world regions. Urban population growth, GDP per capita growth. What a dense chart. Urban population growth in region 1. So in region 1, when you go from the early time period to the later time period, more of the population growth is attributed to more of the ULE is attributed to urban population growth, but less of the ULE is attributed to GDP growth. Okay, but in region 2, when you go from the early to the later, less of the ULE is attributed to urban population growth, but more is attributed to GDP per capita growth. In a study of urban physical expansion, R.M. et al. Conducted a meta-analysis of more than 300 cities worldwide to determine whether urban land expansion, so ULE is urban land expansion. So you're trying to say, is the city getting bigger attributable to population growth or GDP per capita growth, which is economic growth? Okay. Was more strongly influenced by urban population growth or by growth in gross domestic product, GDP per capita, a measure of economic activity. Because efficient national government is necessary to provide urban services and infrastructure that attract economic investment, M et al. Proposed that absent other factors, the importance of GDP per capita growth to ULE would likely increase relative to the importance of population growth as governments become more efficient. If true, this suggests the possibility that... So you need a good government in order to have good economics. And therefore, over time, the GDP... So if you have a good government, the GDP per capita growth tends to matter more over time. Now, that's what happened in Region 2, but not what happened in Region 1. In Region 1, the urban population growth is what caused the land expansion more over time. So what they're suggesting was only really true for Region 2. In Region 2, the economic growth, the GDP per capita growth, is what led to the urban land expansion. So I think they're going to say something like they must have had a government becoming better and more efficient over time in Region 2. Choice: most effective use data from the graph to complete the statement. National governments of countries in Region 1 experienced declines in efficiency in the period from 2000 to 2014 relative to the period from actually maybe, because because that matches with the economic indicator going down for Region 1. Let's leave that. Countries in Region 1 experience a slower rate of economic growth in the period from then than countries in Region 2 did, despite increasing national government efficiency. Well, no, because that would go against what they're saying. They're saying that the increased national efficiency goes hand in hand with the GDP per capita growth. National governments of most countries in Region 2 became more efficient in the period from 2000 to 2014 than they had been in the period from 1970 to 2000, but those of several countries in this region did not. I don't think I understand the dividing it into countries within the region. So those of several countries in this region did not. I think that's a wild card that makes it not that. National governments of countries in Region 1 and Region 2 generally became more efficient in the period from 2000 to 2014 than they had been in the period, but at different rates. I don't think so. I think they're saying, since in the left two chunks of columns, the black goes down, that the government must have become less efficient in here than in here. So I'm going to go with Region 1 experienced declines in efficiency. Yes. China's imports by type 2000 to 2006. Ordinary imports, processing with assembly, processing with inputs. Imports. A student is researching the Chinese government's 1992 shift to a market economy that emphasizes trade liberalization. One means of trade liberalization involves expanding from ordinary imports into an emphasis on processing imports, which have two types: processing with assembly and processing with inputs. Oh, okay, I'm going to read the parenthetical next. Processing with assembly and processing with input. So both this middle and the right are both. That was really dumb of me to have deleted that. Hang on. Well, the middle says, processing with assembly is the middle three bars. So there are two types of processing imports. Processing with assembly, which is the middle bars, in which a firm obtains raw materials from a foreign trading partner without payment and sells the final goods to that partner, charging for assembly. And processing with inputs, in which a firm expends capital to buy raw material from a trading partner, processes them into final goods, and sells those goods to whichever trading partner it chooses. So in the real world, the middle columns are, you take in the stuff and give it back to the people you got it from, but you don't have to pay anything up front to get the raw materials. Then the right-hand column is, you pay to get the raw materials, and then you make your stuff and you can sell it to whomever you want. The student asserts that while initial efforts at trade liberalization were shaped by Chinese firms' limited capital, this situation resolved during the 2000s. So the limited capital is for the middle columns. The limited capital is the limited capital is when you get the raw materials for free, but then you have to sell the stuff back to the people from whom you got them. And then the right-hand columns are when they do have capital. So if that resolved during the 2000s, then what they're saying is, at first the middle columns were relatively low, but then ultimately the right-hand columns increased a lot, which made up for that. Okay, support the student's assertion. Processing imports with inputs were greater than both ordinary imports and processing imports with assembly in 2006. Well, that's not even true, because this black bar is not more than that black bar, so that's gone for sure. From 2000 to 2006, processing imports with inputs rose much more sharply than processing imports with assembly did. Yeah, as in the right-hand columns, the right-hand triplet rose more steeply, so it resolved itself, whereas the middle columns didn't go up nearly as much over time. I think it's that. From 2000 to 2006, neither processing imports with inputs nor processing imports with assembly were greater than ordinary imports Well, that's true, but not the answer, because that has nothing to do with the resolution between the two types of processing imports. Processing imports with assembly were greater in 2006 than processing imports with inputs in 2000. Assembly. That would be the middle black bar being higher than the right-hand dark gray bar. Well, that's true, but not the answer, because that doesn't show that it resolved itself over time. So it's B as in boy. Another super dense question. The Uto-Aztecan language family is divided into a northern branch, which includes the Shoshone language of present-day Idaho and Utah, and a southern one, whose best-known representative is Nahuatl, the language of the Aztec Empire in Mexico. Lexical similarities across the family, including of botanical terms, confirm descent from a single language spoken millennia ago, and the firm's geographical distribution suggests an origin in what is now the U.S. Southwest. However, vocabulary pertaining to maize isn't shared between northern and southern branches, despite the crop's universal cultivation among Uto-Aztecan tribes. Given archaeological evidence that maize originated in Mexico and diffused northward into what became the U.S. Southwest, some linguists reason that. So there are two different branches of the family. One is way up in North America, and one is down in Mexico. But an origin is the origin is somewhere between them. The word for maize, for corn, isn't shared, even though they both grow the corn. There's evidence that maize originated in Mexico and diffused northward. Okay. Most logically completes. Northern Uto-Aztecan tribes likely obtained the crop directly from a southern Uto-Aztecan tribe rather than from a non... Well, that doesn't comment on whether they would have the word for it or not, or when they got it, so I don't think it's that one. Variation in maize-related vocabulary within each branch of the Uto-Aztecan family likely reflects regionally specific methods for cultivating the crop. That's something you're sort of like speculating on, but it doesn't tell you about that at all, so I think those are gone. Southern Uto-Aztecan tribes likely acquired maize at roughly the same time as northern Uto-Aztecan tribes did, though from different sources. That doesn't jump at me either. The family's division into northern and southern branches likely preceded the acquisition of the crop by the Uto-Aztecan tribes. That one makes the most sense to me. So if the families broke apart before they started growing corn to begin with, then it's possible that they would have common words for lots of things, but they wouldn't have the same word for corn because they got the corn after they split apart. I think it's that one. For its 1970 work, Instant Mural, the Chicano art collective ASCO taped members Patsy Valdez and HS to an outdoor wall in East Los Angeles. They taped the people to the wall, okay? The work is manifestly a commentary on constraint, but many critics focus on Valdez and the social constraints women faced at the time, which is understandable but leaves the presence of Valdez's male collaborator Sandoval unexplained. We should instead consider that in 1974, the art establishment's recognition of Chicano artists was and had long been restricted to socio-historical muralists, leaving non-muralist Chicano artists, like ASCO's members, struggling to even exhibit their work. Attending to this context opens an interpretation that accounts for all the evidence, allowing us to conclude that most logically completes the text. I'm going to try to paraphrase this. So the work where they're both taped to the wall is obviously about constraint, but people focus on the female constraint, which makes it confusing as to why there's a guy there at all. Okay? Then they're suggesting we should instead consider that. So the different explanation is that in 1974, Chicano artists in general could only do certain stuff. And if you think of it that way, it makes more sense, I'm guessing. So, allowing us to conclude that while Valdez's presence in Instant Mural represents the social constraints placed on women at the time, Sandoval's presence represents Chicano muralists' frustration at their lack of recognition by the art establishment. I don't think so. I think what they're saying is it actually did not focus on the female constraint itself. It's focusing on the overall Chicano constraint to only being able to do certain types of things back then. The main subject of Instant Mural is female Chicano artists' experience of being doubly constrained by... No. Instant Mural is a reflection of the constraining aesthetic expectations placed on Chicano artists in general, rather than on the social constraints placed specifically on women. Yes. Instant Mural is best understood not as a critique of the social constraints placed on women, but rather as a critique of socio-historical muralist depictions of Chicano culture. No, that's a misreading of it. That was right up until it said a critique of the muralist depictions. That would be like saying it's commenting on how they showed their own culture. No. An analysis by A.E. and colleagues of coins minted in Sidon in the 5th and 4th century BCE reveals a change in their composition over time. While a coin from circa 450 BCE contains about 98% silver and 1% copper, a coin from 367 BCE, the end of B II's reign, contains 74.2% silver and 24.7% copper, giving it a relatively yellowish appearance that traders would have noticed. Because coins with a silver content below 80% were widely considered unsuitable for trade, E et al. Speculate that a crisis in confidence in the currency occurred in Sidon around 367 BC, which was likely relieved, despite Sidon's persistent oppressive financial obligations, as a result of B II's successor A I's decision to... So they watered down the coin. They mixed together copper into the coin, which makes it not as pure, so not as valuable, or not as useful in trade. Then they're speculating that the crisis that made them do that was relieved. So they fixed the crisis even though they had money problems. They fixed the crisis by doing something. Okay. So the subsequent political leader Abdastart I decided to fix it by doing what? Proclaim that the percentage of silver in coins suitable for trade would be raised to a threshold. Well, that wouldn't solve it at all, because that would be like saying they need to be even better to be suitable, even though ours are not suitable. So no. Keep the amount of silver in Sidonian coins consistent with that in coins minted in but decrease their weight. Keep the amount of silver consistent with that in coins minted in 367 BC, but decrease their weight. Interesting. So if you kept the same amount of silver but decreased the weight of the coin, well, you must be decreasing the other components, so it's less of an alloy and more of pure silver. I think that actually is the answer. That's really tricky. It's almost like a math or a chemistry question. Begin minting heavier coins with a proportion of silver to copper similar to that. Well, no, that doesn't solve it. Fund the mining of some copper deposits that. Well, no. It's this. A strange question. Nigerian-American artist T.O.O. uses black ink pens to create highly detailed drawings of human figures. Her portrait of novelist Zadie Smith is displayed in the National Portrait Gallery in London. Well, it's not A, because what comes before the colon can't stand alone. Her portrait of novelist Zadie Smith. Her portrait of novelist Zadie Smith, long pause or logical pause? No. Her portrait of novelist Zadie Smith is displayed. I think it's just C, but let me say it with D. Her portrait of novelist Zadie Smith is displayed in the... No. A government body officially known as the Althing... this is a modifier mistake. A government body officially known as the Althing, the world's oldest parliament... No. This is like walking across the street, the car hit me. No. That's wrong because it makes it sound like the car was walking. Walking across the street, I were struck by a car. So, a government body officially known as the Althing, whatever comes next is the Althing. Iceland's parliament, yeah. The first meeting, no. 9:30, no. The only one that's not a modifier mistake is B as in boy. As the 14th U.S. Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden has many responsibilities. These include overseeing the Library of Congress's collections, which boast more than 162 million blank, managing the U.S. Copyright Office, which registers copyright claims and advises Congress on copyright law, and appointing the U.S. Poet Laureate. this is the real hint, and this is why you always have to read it to the end. The semicolon is dividing the items in a complex list, which boasts more. So, overseeing the Library of Congress's collections, which boasts more than 160 million copies, that itself is the first item in the list. Then you go semicolon, and then the U.S. Copyright Office, which registers copyright. Yeah, that's the second item. Managing the U.S. Copyright Office, which registers copyright claims and advises Congress on copyright law. That's the second item. So it's the items in a complex list, which boasts more than one. Yeah, tricky. Recently unearthed Neronian tools in France dating to 54,000 years ago and attributed to Homo sapiens may provide evidence that interaction between Neanderthals and modern humans occurred 10,000 years earlier than was previously blank. Finding that, if true, would overturn current theories about H. sapiens migration during the Upper Paleolithic. Well, it's not A or B, because what comes after the punctuation in both of those is not a full sentence, right? A finding that, if true, would overturn whatever, that's not a full sentence, that's only a fragment. And it's definitely not C, because if you don't pause at all, it makes no sense and you can't parse it, right? Humans occurred 10,000 years earlier than was previously supposed to, finding that. No. Let me read it with the right answer. So, and attributed to Homo sapiens may provide evidence that interactions between Neanderthals and modern humans occurred 10,000 years earlier than was previously supposed, a finding that, if true, would overturn current theories. Digital artist JC primarily uses a suite of software tools to create illustrations for children's books. To manifest the warm and welcoming atmospheres that are a signature of her blank, she occasionally relies on more traditional art techniques such as painting with watercolors. Well, again, let's eliminate the wrong ones. It's not C as in cat, because what comes after cannot stand alone. Her work. To manifest the warm and welcoming atmospheres that are a signature of her work. So, yeah, for C as in cat, what comes before is only a fragment. And for D as in dog, same thing, right? What comes before the semicolon is still technically just a fragment. To manifest the warm and welcoming atmospheres that are a signature of her work, though, that's not a sentence. So, you need a pause here, but do you need a pause after though? I think so. Let me say it with B as in boy and then with A as in apple, which is the right answer. To manifest the warm and welcoming atmospheres that are a signature of her work, though she occasionally relies on. No, it's A, right? To manifest the warm and welcoming atmospheres that are a signature of her work, though she occasionally relies on more traditional art techniques, such as painting with watercolors. Chondrites are stony meteorites that are undifferentiated. That is, their contents have not melted and separated into distinct layers. They are hardly blank. Many chondrites experience aqueous alteration as a result of exposure to fluids, as well as fracturing, veining, and localized melting due to collisions with other objects. Okay, so just like the previous, let's eliminate some of the wrong ones. C as in cat is gone because what's after the semicolon is not a full sentence. Though many chondrites experience aqueous alteration as a result of exposure to fluids, as well as fracturing, veining, and localized melting due to collisions with other objects, not a sentence. D as in dog is a comma splice because after the word though, that would be a period and a capital letter. They are hardly pristine, though. Many chondrites. That would have to be in capital M for many, so no. Okay, so it's either semicolon or nothing. They are hardly pristine, though many chondrites experience aqueous alteration. No, it's B as in boy because it's not A, and I can explain why it's B. It's not A because the fact that they have alteration doesn't go against them being hardly pristine. That actually agrees with them being hardly pristine. It makes more sense if you go all the way back and read the first sentence again. Stony meteorites that are undifferentiated. So the stones haven't been mixed into distinct layers. But you're saying they're still not perfect. So they haven't mixed together. They're hardly perfect, though. They've experienced all sorts of other problems. That's really tricky. But what comes after the semicolon goes together with the fact that they're not perfect, right? They're hardly perfect, though. They have all sorts of other problems. That the geographic center of North America lay in the state of North Dakota was conceded by all involved. Establishing its precise coordinates proved more divisive. It seems like just a period and a capital letter to me, but that's not an answer choice. Definitely not B, because that's a comma splice. It's not A, because the fact that establishing the coordinates proved more divisive is not an explanation or a list. It's D as in dog. It's two closely related full sentences. That the geographic center of North America lay in the state of North Dakota was conceded by all involved. Establishing its precise coordinates proved more divisive. Following the American Revolutionary War, North American foodways underwent a radical transformation, fueled in part by spiking consumer demand for certain grains. The cultivation, trade, and transportation of maize and wheat, blank, reconfigured the continent's existing regional foodways into a globally oriented food system. In particular, alternatively, by comparison, second of all. It's not second of all because they didn't list something else first. I don't think it's by comparison because you're not comparing certain types of crop to others. Alternatively, I think it's just in particular because they're saying the whole thing underwent radical transformation because of demand for certain grains. And then in particular, there was especially high demand for the grains of maize and wheat. When printing paper money for the colony of Pennsylvania in the 1730s, Benjamin Franklin, then a Philadelphia shop owner, took steps to combat the circulation of counterfeit notes, such as weaving blue threads and muscovite, a reflective mineral, into the paper he used. Blank, he stamped the notes with detailed images of sage leaves that proved difficult for forgers to replicate. Specifically, that said, for example, moreover. Well, stamping the sage leaf imprints has nothing to do with the blue threads and the muscovite. So it's not for example. Definitely not specifically. It's not that said because it doesn't go against what came before. That said is kind of like however or on the other hand. So it must just be moreover, or you could have said additionally. Okay. Wants to identify what type of scientist she is. Is it? No. Sometimes, no. There are scientists, no. Chowdhury is a sedimentologist. Yeah. Scientist, yeah. Studies, yeah. A scientist, sure. That one seems but painfully straightforward, okay. Wants to indicate the year Yosemite Falls was completed. So the answer has to have a number in it. Unless I'm crazy, it's got to be just C as in cat. While living, no. Was completed. These seem almost laughably simple compared to the ones we were doing 15, 20 minutes ago, but sure, okay. Wants to present an overview of the study's findings. Present an overview of the study's findings. The 2021 study determined the information rate of 17 languages and bits of information conveyed per second. I don't think so, but researchers found that information was conveyed more quickly in Spanish at 7.7 syllables per second than Vietnamese at 5.3 syllables per second. Vietnamese had the 16th fastest syllable rate, lower than that of Spanish, which had the second fastest. However, Spanish had the lower information rate of the two. These both seem hyper-specific rather than an overview of the findings, but let's keep going. Though some of the languages differed in number of syllables spoken per second, all 17 conveyed information at roughly the same rate. That seems like more of an overview, but now let's look back. So they wanted to determine the rate. They calculated bits of information conveyed per second. It was approximately consistent across the 17 languages. Calculate the number of syllables spoken per second. Yeah. So it's not this. It's not that the information was conveyed more quickly. Approximately consistent. This is the real important takeaway. So it's more like, even though the syllable rate is faster or slower for different languages, the main takeaway is that it conveys information at the same rate. Wants to place Einstein's argument within its historical context. During the dawn of quantum theory, Einstein maintained the independent reality of some subatomic entities, although Bohr's opposing interpretation would become the widely accepted view. Maybe. At the 1927 Solvay Conference on Physics, Einstein disagreed with Bohr's argument that subatomic entities like electrons had a reality independent of observation. The attendees of the 1927 Solvay Conference were among the preeminent scientists of their era, including Einstein, who opposed... I don't think that really puts it in historical context. That's more about who went to the conference. In 1927, Einstein and Bohr engaged in a famous debate. Bohr's argument, later called the Copenhagen interpretation, would remain popular decades after. Well, that doesn't place Einstein's argument in historical context, so it's either A or B. During the dawn of quantum theory, Einstein maintained the independent reality of some subatomic entities. That's that, yeah. Bohr's position, later called the Copenhagen interpretation, remains the most widely accepted theory in historical context. So, I think, I think historical context merges together these two. So, the conference in 1927 brought together all the people to discuss the emerging field of quantum theory. So I think it's A. Let's try to say why it's not B. At the conference, Einstein disagreed with Bohr's argument that subatomic entities like... Because that's not really putting it... Well... Oh, that's just wrong. Oh, sorry, no, that's just wrong. Because, no, that is what Einstein said. Einstein said they do have a reality independent of. So that's not even Bohr's argument, so that's wrong. So it's A. That was a really... Oh, did I really foolishly leave a couple blank? No, of course it's that, right? And then... What did I miss here? Did I leave another one blank foolishly? It was 6. Oh, we said it's that. Yeah. That was a really, really hard section. It's also tough to explain some of these where there's sort of like... You sort of have a gut feel for what it is, but explaining it out loud is much trickier. But I enjoy the challenge of that. So that's about as hard as it gets for anything on the SAT, which is when you get all of them right on the first reading and writing section, it gives you ones that are just brutal on the second section.